Very nice.
So, okay, hello everyone, I'm Jo. I am talking today about using visual methods in qualitative research. So, Brendan hasn't entirely nicked everything I was going to talk about, but we could consider it a useful link between the two. So I'm going to talk about visual methods, why we might want to use them as qualitative researchers and how we might use them. I'm going to talk to you a bit about examples of approaches I've used, and then I'll talk about some things you should think about considering if you do choose to use this sort of approach. So, background. Today I'm going to define visual research methods, and I'm going to talk about them in this way. They're methods using some kind of visual materials to generate discussion around the research topic. This means that I'm going to be talking about them as communicational tools, so a way of facilitating discussion and communication rather than as representational texts. So I'm not doing the dumping the interview, I'm talking about using visual methods as a way of making the interviews a little bit different. In other disciplines, and Brendan touched on this as well, they look at visual materials as representing something and they analyse the visual materials themselves, particularly if they are created within the interview setting. Again, I find this a very difficult area. I will talk about some sort of looking at analysing and looking at some charts that in an approach we use later on. But mainly today, I'm talking about visual materials as a way of facilitating talk. So, why use visual methods? Our experience, as we've just heard, it's made up of very different and varied dimensions. It's not just made up of language. And particularly in today's social media culture, you've just heard about using kind of online communication, but if you think about everyday communication, with the advent of social media, lots of our communication now is visual. We send pictures to each other. So researchers have argued that using visual methods in qualitative research offers new ways to both communicate and to access experience. Visual methods can be accessible, they can be useful if perhaps the people that you're working with have language difficulties, so find communicating eloquently in a standard interview situation quite difficult. Children, quite often, people think about using visual materials in qualitative work with them. They can be helpful if it's a topic that you're investigating which is just difficult to put into words. It offers another way of thinking about it. And in our experience as well, not only are they engaging for participants, they're engaging for researchers as well. It's just a fun way to do research. So today I'm going to kind of divvy the talk into two parts, and I'm first of all going to talk about using pre-existing visual materials as a stimuli in interview situations. So this is where you either generate or get your participant to generate some kind of visual material prior to the interview, and then they bring it or you bring it to the interview setting and have a chat about it. And then I'm going to move on to generating visual materials as part of the interview process. So this is where the participant comes to the interview, and as part of your interview you are doing something and creating some kind of visual material with them. I'm going to focus, we're talking about generating, bringing materials to the interview, and the researcher bringing those materials to the interview where they already exist. I'm going to focus on photographs. The reason I'm going to do this is because it is by far the most widely used approach in the literature. Again, this was touched on in the previous talk a little bit. I'm going to use the term photo elicitation. There are other terms used. There's photo novella, there's photo voice. They're used a bit differently by different people. My understanding, having read around it a bit, I think, is that things like photo voice and photo novella tend to be associated quite closely with particular methodological approaches, so action research type approaches, and they're quite often referred to participants capturing and reflecting back on their own community. And that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about using photos as just as an image which can generate multiple meanings. So they don't represent anything true or right. They are just something there to start the conversation. So it's assumed that from this approach, the viewer will construct their own meaning in association with a picture, that there isn't a right or wrong, and that the images, the photos, provide a conversation starter. So you can do this in a simple way where it's directly related to the research topic. So Epstein and colleagues, you did a study looking at children's experiences of attending a summer camp in the United States. And to generate the talk, they got the kids to first of all look at photos of different places around the camp, and then got them to talk about different things that had happened that they remembered happening in those locations. So really just it was starting off that conversation. But they don't have to be related to the topic at all. So this is an example from some work that I did with colleagues from the University of Huddersfield. And it's from a project that we did for Hull City Council. And the project was around identifying community assets in Hull's local communities. So asset-based approaches to community development are really big in public health at the moment. And they are sold as being a kind of a different way of looking at public health to a traditional deficit approach where they go in and kind of look what's wrong. It's suggested that you should look instead at what a community has available to it and then build on those strengths to help that community help itself. This project was commissioned by Hull, so we won it through a tender process. Shortly after the 2012 Health and Social Care Act had come through, and basically what that acted loads of things, but one of the things that it did was it made public health the responsibility of local authorities. So it wasn't a national responsibility anymore, it made public health the responsibility of local authorities. So Hull Public Health Department for the City Council now has lots of responsibilities that they didn't have. And of course this is in a time of austerity, so they're given all these responsibilities and less money. So assets is quite a kind of nice, they were quite into this idea of finding out about assets, because what's going on already that we can kind of mimic elsewhere and kind of, get people to do themselves. So we got this project, qualitative work, and I didn't know anything about Hull at all. I'd never even been there, and I got this project to kind of do this work for them. So the first thing that we did was to run a workshop event in the town hall. And with the support of the public health team, we invited everyone we could think of who might know something about public health in Hull. So we invited kind of council people, we went through health people, there was a big directory that was really useful of all the local community groups and charities, so I rang everyone on that list and invited them to the event. And we wanted to do activities with them to get them all talking, so loads of different stakeholders. And one of the activities that we used was this photo elicitation activity. So we had 100 photographs, black and white photographs of just different things, and we asked them all to sit at tables, and we made sure that the tables had people who didn't know each other on the tables, different types of participants, and we asked them to choose a photograph that captures something about what it might mean to make health and well-being everybody's responsibility, discussing your groups. So we've got about 55, 60 people at this event, so they're all sitting at their own tables. They take a photograph, blue tack it to a big bit of paper in the middle, and we ask them to talk about it in their groups. So it was really successful. They really got into it. They loved this activity. We did feedback sheets afterwards. We didn't ask them specifically about this activity, but on most of the sheets, it was like, that photo activity was brilliant, really liked it. Got them talking. We found out some really useful stuff, like, for instance, I'd just been working on the City Council documentation at this point, so I'd been thinking, right, I'm going to speak to groups in the kind of quadrants that the City Council had divided the city up into. It became really apparent that that wasn't how things actually were in Hull. They were very false boundaries. There were actually different neighbourhoods that stuff happened in that didn't match with the city boundaries. So that kind of insider knowledge was really useful, making contacts and all of that sort of stuff. So it was the first time I'd used it, and I was super enthused and thought this was brilliant. And I was going to publish loads on it because it had just worked so well. And I couldn't, because it turned out that my colleague, Barry Percy Smith, who's at Huddersfield, who suggested it as a way of doing it, I said, let's write a paper and let's do it. And he said, oh no, you can't. And I said, well, why can't I? And he said, well, they're all copyright images. You can't use them in anything. It was like, ah! So I used it again, and I didn't use copyright images this time. So in the next project I used it in, it was with a bit of work that I was doing with a charity in Yorkshire called Creative Minds. Creative Minds were set up by the local trust, and it was in direct response to service users who were using the trust mental health services, wanted to have more creative activity as part of their mental health recovery process. So Creative Minds was set up. They work in partnership with creative organisations in the local area to set up courses and projects and peer-led projects for people in that part of the world. And one of their community partners is the Yorkshire Sculpture Park, which, if you haven't been there, I highly recommend. It's a beautiful, fabulous, fabulous place. So because I was doing work with Creative Minds and Yorkshire Sculpture Park, I got to do some workshop events for the day at the Yorkshire Sculpture Park, which was great, and used this activity again. So the people we had at that activity were health and social care professionals, mental health service users and their carers, and creative practitioners. And the point of the work was to look at the impacts of creative activity on mental health and well-being. And the reason we were doing it is because Creative Minds wanted some way of documenting and recording the work that was going on. So we had those different people come. I made sure that I just chose random open access images this time. So again, we had 100 or so of them on the table. So at that event, one of the things I'd really thought from the whole work that we'd done was that it had got different kinds of people talking, that had worked really well. So what I did with this project, which worked on one level and didn't work on another, and I can't give you answers here because I still haven't quite worked out what to do about it. When people came in to the event, I gave them a different colour of post-it notes. I had kind of I made sure that at this event, again there were about 50 people at the event, I made sure that I got a third patients and carers there, a third health and social care professionals, and a third creative practitioners. And when they came in at the beginning of the day, I gave them a different colour of post-it notes depending on what I'd passed them out and why I had invited them. The problem is that lots of people weren't one or the other. So if I was kind of like, are you a service user? No, I'm an artist. Okay, well actually you're on my list as this type, but anyway, and people didn't like being labelled, and they didn't like having that with them, which is fair enough, and I understand it. The reason I've done it though is because I wanted to kind of track through the day who was responding most, because my fear was that in that situation it was going to be the health and social care practitioners talking over the mental health service users and the carers, and people weren't going to be able to have their voice heard. That did happen. We did some other activities, and for the first two activities, because I got them all to put their answers in post-it notes similar to yours at the back, you could just see that, I can't remember what the colours were, but the health and social care professionals were all over these charts. And then there was, some nice creative ones, which often had lovely doodles on and things like that as well. But there wasn't much of the service user voice coming through. Some of the service users that we had there were inpatients, and they'd been brought to the event with their carers from the ward. And they were just very quiet, and they weren't participating, and I had this, it isn't working, until we got to this event. It's not equal, but this is way more. We had way more responses. It was more equal. People were contributing equally at this point, much more so. People felt they had a voice within it. Something about having the photograph rather than kind of asking about experience and talking about things, putting it on the photo really, really worked. And this is from one of the guys who'd come from the inpatient unit, who'd come to do the activity. who said nothing. He'd said nothing at all the whole time. He looked so uncomfortable. I tried my best to integrate him. It hasn't worked at all. He really got into this activity. Yeah, he scribbled all over the post-it notes. And then at the end of the activity, when we were having the kind of big group discussion about what was on your poster, he asked, could he, and stood up and read out what he said. And he hadn't done anything before that. So it was really kind of enthused me about the way it can encourage participation of different kinds of people who might not feel comfortable in other types of qualitative research settings. Okay, moving away from my work and onto other people's. Now, so example of the kind of work you can do where the participants generate the photographic material prior to the interview. So I really like this paper. It's by Frith and Harcourt, and it's about women's experiences of having chemotherapy treatment for breast cancer. So they had 15 women who were all going for chemotherapy. They interviewed them before they started chemotherapy, and then, because it was 2007, they gave them a disposable camera. And they asked them to take photographs of the chemotherapy treatment process, and then after the treatment had finished, they interviewed the ladies again, this time using the photographs in the interview. In the interview, they focused very much on, asked people about why they had taken that photograph, rather than what is that photograph. And they got some really beautiful, detailed accounts of experience by doing this. They got a longitudinal sense of what was happening. Again, there was this kind of idea that it facilitated recall. So when women were looking at the pictures in the interview, they'd be saying, "Oh, I've completely forgotten about that," and it would kind of, it generate some talk which it wouldn't have happened otherwise. Participants were able to decide themselves how they wanted to capture their experience. So some people took photographs simply of their changing appearance over the process of chemotherapy. Other people took photographs of the hospital and while things were happening. And other people took much more abstract photographs. And I think my favourite example from the paper is a lady who's taken a picture of a rowan tree, so red berries on the tree on a cloudy day. And they asked her why she's taken that particular photograph. And she said it was just captured how I was that day. I was so grey and I was hanging on for dear life, like the berries on the tree, and that kind of sense of what her experience was like on that day going through the process. So kind of capturing the intimate and the private really nicely as well. Final example on these ones. So it doesn't have to just be photographs. So Dawn Manet used a variety of different approaches in her study. So she was looking in her study about the experience of mothers and daughters living on a housing estate. And it was her home community. That was where she was from as well as where she lived. So she was concerned before she started doing this work, first of all about kind of what impact her insider status would have. And she was worried about things like, would she not pick up on stuff because she was just taking it for granted, that she wouldn't see stuff that other researchers might spot. And she draws on Deleuze's notion of defamiliarization. So she wanted to kind of find some approaches to make her look at familiar things afresh from a new viewpoint. So she decided to use visual methods in her work, and she used 3 different approaches. So she asked her mother and daughter participants to either take photographs of the local environment prior to the interview, and to use kind of found items like magazines and what have you, to make collages, or she got them to do drawings beforehand and then she interviewed them afterwards. So lots of different approaches you can use. Okay, so now going to move on to talking about how you can generate visual materials as part of a research interview. So I'm going to talk very briefly about drawing approaches and then a bit more about diagramming approaches. I'm going to suggest that there's 2 different diagramming approaches, relational and sequential, and I'm going to focus on relational. One of the reasons I'm not going to focus on drawing very much is because it is so unappealing to me personally, because I can't draw at all. I struggle to kind of draw a stickman. So if I was in a research interview situation and someone asked me to draw anything, it would completely make me clam up. but I recognise that for some people it might be a really nice way of expressing themselves. And there are a range of methods that involve the participant drawing something to represent or stimulate their experience, their account of their experience. So this is the same study which Brendan cited before, as which she got people to draw pictures representing their experience of the menopause. So you can, she just said draw something representing your experience. It's kind of very broad, open instructions. You can also have much more constraints. So Susie here used trees. She asked people to draw trees when she was talking to young people who had recovered from cancer treatment about their experiences of that. Young Tiffy's rivers of experience approach, she gets people to draw rivers and do things along there. And Cristancho, rich pictures. So Cristancho and colleagues do really make it very, very explicit that in this approach they make it clear that no artistic ability is required. So rich pictures, what the approach tends to be interview on a topic, so have a bit of chat about the experience you're focusing on first, then a picture, and then start the interview again looking at the picture. So this one is from a study that they did where they were talking to surgeons, and they were talking to surgeons about the influence of context on the kind of complicated decisions they have to make in complex situations. So they interviewed the surgeons, they then got them to draw pictures, this is one of them, and then they interviewed them again. And what they found was that the first bit of the interview the surgeon was kind of barking out responses in a very kind of procedural way. This happened, this happened, this happened. And actually by getting them to do the picture, they were able to get at a much more kind of, yeah, but what actually happened, and, you know, kind of, it gave a much more detailed account of experience. I really appreciate the whole, you don't have to have artistic ability, but if anyone asked me to draw anything in an interview situation, it would still put me off. So it's not an approach that I am planning to use in the near future. I like diagramming approaches. So in diagramming approaches, the interviewee creates an image from a set of standard elements. And I think one of the reasons I like this approach is because it looks like you've created something beautiful, but you genuinely don't need any artistic ability. So it makes me feel creative, even though I'm really not. So these kind of diagrams can be sequential, and the best known of these is a timeline, simple timeline. So line here, that happened, then that happened, then that happened, then that happened. And tend to kind of be used to think about recounting processes and events. But diagrams can also be relational. They can represent the interactions between multiple elements. And I'm going to talk today about one that I've used a lot, which is the picture technique. So the picture, main founder is Professor Nigel King at Huddersfield. I worked at Huddersfield for 9 years, and there was a group of us with Nigel who worked quite a lot on developing it, and I've now left, and he sent me off to the world, so conquer the world with Pixel is our hope. So it came from a methodological challenge. Originally, Pixel started because Nigel and his doctoral student were trying to look at collaborative working in nurses. And whenever the student went to talk to nurses about their experiences in collaborative working, she kept guessing, as a nurse, I work holistically with no. And she'd worked in nursing, and she knew damn well this was not what was happening in terms of collaborative working, but she couldn't get them to talk beyond the kind of speak, so she wanted to find some way of getting a genuine lived experience, what was really happening. It's really hard if you are asking people to think about collaborative working in health and social care settings. Often there's so many people involved that it's hard to keep it in mind. So it's much easier to slip into that official procedural version. So Pictor was developed to kind of try and get around these challenges. So what happens in Pictor is you ask your participants to think of what I'm describing now is the original version of Pictor that we use with staff, generally health and social care staff. So we asked participants to think of a memorable case of collaborative working that they were involved with, and to think about everyone who was involved in that case in any way. Really, really broad, and very limited instructions. The only instructions are the chart has to include you and it has to include the patient. You can include anyone and everyone else, and we have had dogs on there, we've had the weather on there, we've had priests on there, you know, so we try and get people as broad as possible. Then we give them a set of arrow-shaped post-it notes, and they come in 3 colours. And we ask them to write a pseudonym or a role title for each person involved on the post-it notes. And then we ask them, we give them a big flip chart, A0 sheet of paper, and we ask them to arrange the arrows on the chart to produce a graphical representation of the case, which is then known as a pictorial chart, and we use that as a basis for talking about the case. Much easier if I show you a picture. So that is what a pictorial chart looks like. So the example I'm going to talk to you about now is from a study that we did on nursing roles, which was published last year, and the example is from a lady we're going to call Sam Morgan. Sam Morgan is a community matron, and the case she's talking about is an elderly lady who's coming towards the end of life. She's having palliative and end-of-life care. Not got long to go. She's got senile dementia and multiple other health problems. She's living at home on her own, and she's very wealthy. Main carer is the nephew. He's really caring, but quite difficult and demanding. And one of the reasons Sam has chosen to talk about this case is because the professionals involved were initially a little bit worried that he was basically in it to just kind of make sure that he got the house at the end of it, and had recently reappeared. And actually, as the story went on, it turned out he was hard work, but actually everything was all right, and he really loved his auntie. So anyway, she talked about this case, but this is the chart that she uses, and we're asking her about how the different professionals involved work together to provide care for this lady. So she said, I've got all these touching, referring to the diagram, because I felt that we got really close and I knew what everybody wanted at the end and what the patient wanted. So this is all these up here. These aren't touching because I felt that these people had their own agenda and weren't looking at the bigger picture. So we've got GP here and continuing care. Loads of problems with GPs in these studies. Anyway. And then these arrows all sort of going the other way because they sort of thought they'd done their job, so they pulled out. So kind of lots of these are secondary care services, just kind of done our bit, off we go. So there's lots of things on there, and had we simply said to her, tell us about looking after a patient, we don't get this level of detail, we don't get this level of understanding about who was involved in how. So these are all different pictorial charts from the work. We've started to notice, and we're working on this at the moment, and I'm doing some work with Nigel and Sudi, who did the trees before, on this at the moment. We're trying to analyse and look at the pictorial chart, because certainly for professionals, we always say you can't look at the pictorial chart on its own. You have to have the interview transcript with you, because you don't know by just looking at it what people are trying to represent. Nonetheless, we could definitely, by the end of the project, which this work comes from, there was like 70 participants in it. It was quite big for a qual study. Those of us who've worked on it, we could look at it and go, district nurse, specialist nurse, like we could just look at the charts and we knew who it was. And one of the reasons for that was that community staff tended to have these kind of charts, so they were really aware of kind of all the different people, and they had a holistic view of the patient and what was going on. Specialists tend to have this kind of, by the nature of their work, they tend to be involved at key points. So diagnosis, treatment, discharge, they're involved at those kind of very important points, but they had very little awareness of what else was going on in the patient's life, and also they had very little awareness of what was happening in community services, so it's quite a disjointed experience for the patient going in. This is the manager's one, so they're all, we're in the centre and we're really important, and everyone else is coming out from us. And we also use them with patients and carers, and this is a patient and carer one. So we hadn't started it off as a patient and carer tool, although that's kind of more my interest. We started it off with professionals, but we used it with the patients and carers, and they really, really liked it. So we then took the pictorial work that we'd been doing in the bigger project, and we started applying it in another study we were working on, which was looking at end-of-life care. And in particular, we were evaluating an end-of-life care service. Really lovely service, which at the time when we did the work was the only service in the country to offer treatments in the home environment, which normally everywhere else people could only get at home. So it was enabling people to die at home, very well cared for and pain-free, and things in a way that wasn't available elsewhere. And we were evaluating this novel service. So we were speaking to professionals about their experiences of it, but we also wanted to speak to, importantly, to patients and carers. Now, there's some very obvious challenges to undertaking qualitative research and interview work with people who are approaching the end of life, who are dying. First off, it's a really, really hard, emotive, difficult time, and you have to be incredibly sensitive to what is going on for people at that time. But there's really practical problems as well. If someone's dying, they're, by definition, quite unwell, and sometimes those symptoms can make it really difficult for them to take part in something like a standard qualitative research interview, pain, breathlessness, that sort of thing. There's a real problem investigating family members, so significant others, spouse, carers, that sort of thing, to talk to them about their experiences, because all they will talk about is the patient. It's really difficult to get, but what about you? What are you going through? Trying to get them to talk about their stuff is really, really hard. And the complex nature of the care. So my dad died at home a few years ago, and I was his carer at home. And it was at the same time I was doing this work, which was all kind of like close to home in lots of ways. But so I knew about all the services because I knew it academically, and I was doing research on it. And I still didn't know why are these 15 people coming in through the door, and who are they? And I don't understand it. So the complex nature of end-of-life care is really difficult. So Pictor helps in terms of the kind of being able to lay them all out. It helps in terms of the symptoms, because it enables you to take a break. If you're doing a chart and you start feeling unwell or you get restless, you can just stop and you can have a rest and you can get better, and the chart is still there when you go back to it. We made some kind of differences to it. So instead of using the massive piece of paper, quite often people were bedbound, so that wouldn't have been possible. So we did things like we used a smaller bit of paper, brought a board with us so people could easily do it in bed. Sometimes we had to do things like get the patient to tell us where to put the arrows because they weren't well enough to do it themselves. But they liked it and it worked. And I'm really, having gone through the experiences as well with my dad, there is sometimes around ethics and committees and this kind of notion of, well, you can't do research because it would be kind of invading their privacy and that sort of thing. Lots of people in that situation want to tell their story, and it is not up to ethics committees to make that judgment. It is up to the patients and the carers themselves to make that judgment. But I feel really comfortable that by doing something like this, we have created a way which allows people to take part in research if they want to. So, this is from one of our, this is from a patient at End of Life talking about their stuff. We've got the animals, the kids, GPs over here again. This is an entirely another story about, but anyway, they really shouldn't go there, they should go there somewhere. But yeah, lots of people on. That's a patient who did that one, and this is one from a carer. And lots of the, it was excellent service. We could write a very positive evaluation report on that service. Everyone thought it was great. Okay, so things to think about if you decide that you too would like to join us on the dark side and use some visual material in your work. First off, ownership and use of images. I've already said about the copyright issues that we came across, and there are lots and lots now of open access image repositories that you can access instead. But what if you've asked someone to take photographs, for instance, of their local environment beforehand? Who owns the photographs? You or them? What if they've taken photographs of people? What do you do then? These aren't insurmountable issues, but they need thinking about beforehand. So, for instance, you give clear instructions that if it's going to be a problem, you give those instructions not to take photographs of people. Or you can get your participants more on board as a kind of co-researcher type role and get them to have forms where people waive their right to anonymity and agree to be on the photographs. That's possible as well, and that's You can do that through ethics committees. But all of this stuff needs negotiating with you participants prior to them doing anything like for you. So it needs to be really, really clear what you're going to use the images for and who owns them. Overcoming resistance, like if you were trying to get me to draw something. We have had a really positive response to our picture work generally. We must have done, we've done hundreds and hundreds of them now. We've had one person just do a flat, no, not doing it. And we've had a couple of people be a bit Blue Peter, isn't it? Yeah, kind of like, but they got into it, I think, afterwards. But so yeah, some people just aren't that keen on using this kind of approach, and that's fair enough. There's a nice paper, which is on my reference list, but I've not put it there. Who's it by? Packard. So Packard, 2008. Packard did a study in the States, and he gave homeless men cameras to take pictures of, and then he wanted to have interviews with them, and he did this in trying to try and engage them in the research, and he thought he was being all kind of open and participatory. And he's written a really open, beautiful article, slamming his own research. I really like it when researchers do that. Where he found that he gave them disposable cameras, and he then took the cameras and went and developed them and went back to them, the photos, and quite often they weren't very good photographs. And so the people he was trying to talk to were all kind of like, oh, let me see. Oh, I haven't got you any good ones, have I? And then they wouldn't really talk to him and wouldn't really engage with the process, so it kind of mucked up the process for him. So it can be accessible, can promote collaborative and participatory approach, but it's not the answer to everything. It's not Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy style fortitude. Ambiguity. What I see in a photo may not be the same as what you see in a photo, etc. But I kind of think that's a good thing. I think that's part of why I like using these. It's that discussion between me and you about kind of coming to an understanding of, oh right, I get it, you see it like that and I see it like that. I think that's a really nice way of getting more information in an interview setting. So I don't have a problem with the ambiguity. Already said, and I've given you the end-of-life care example, really useful for sensitive and difficult topics. That kind of where people can't talk about things, where there are language barriers and things like that. I think they're really useful. The other thing I think they're good for is keeping an interview on topic. You know that thing where you get a participant who's just kind of like going on something completely different. If you have that visual material in front of you, I find it easier to draw the person's attention back to this is kind of what we're all here. I think we can forget as qualitative researchers as well that being an interviewee can be really scary, and particularly I think that this is SciPac, isn't it? So most of us are also going to have the word psychologist in our title. So to the general population, we are quite scary people because they think that we can read their minds and do, change their behaviour and do all these things that I haven't managed to learn how to do yet. So I think that using visual materials is useful because it gives your participants some kind of ownership of things. If they have created the visual material in the interview, then it's their, in my work, it's their pictorial chance. And they have ownership of that, and they kind of have, I think it can address that power imbalance and make people feel more comfortable with it. So, I hope I have convinced you of the use of these visual materials, references, and so many people to thank, or acknowledge, because it's no researchers, but this has been a huge team effort, and I have brilliant supportive colleagues who are all fabulous. So Nigel just helped me with everything and done lots of stuff. Barry and Alison from Leeds were involved in the whole work, and all of the rest of those people have been involved and are still involved in pictorial work. And if you ever get a chance to work with any of them, do, because I can highly recommend them. They're all brilliant. And thank you for listening. Any questions?
Does
No, they write the name on the arrows. One of the things we can't, the top tip for if anyone chooses to use Pictor, the reason that, because we do have the colours, and you'll see on here, this little bit here, that's us marking what the colours are. Sometimes people do use the colours, sometimes they don't. But this is all the researcher handwriting, because in the very early days of Pictor, we had a disaster where the researchers did the interview, it was really great, and they walked into the car park and it was a bit windy, and all the arrows go off the chart. So now we take a picture of the chart as soon as humanly possible, and then we draw around the arrows and keep a digital copy of them that way.
I think you're going with boogie file.
That would be awesome. I like that idea. Can you get flip charts like fuzzy file? That would be brilliant.
Yeah.